Hello everyone, this is Ben, and coming to you with the final historical evidence video. I thought it would be a good idea, after wrapping up all the historical evidence videos, to do a wrap-up video, or basically we're going to quiz ourselves on this historical evidence for the resurrection stuff. And the way we're going to do it is it's just basically a way of reviewing and going back and thinking like, okay, do I get this? So what we're going to do is look at counter examples. I've got 6 different counter examples where people come up with like, basically, alright, if you think that the historical evidence proves Christianity true, then this other thing has to be true, like Mormonism, or the Moonies church, the Unification Church, or like this other thing, or like 9/11 hijackers. I guess we'll add them in there too. Like so like all of these different groups, the counter examples, just as a way to kind of test what we've learned and sort of review it before we move on. The thing about this historical evidence that I've learned as I've I hate to say this, I've learned it as I've learned the evidence. I've learned this about the evidence. I've noticed this. Historical evidence for the resurrection and just in general for things tends to be more of a memorization issue, tends to be more of a task that involves a lot of memorization, more so than understanding. So like what I mean is, when I was in school, all of my classes, I was an engineering student at university, and never graduated, by the way. But I took a lot of classes, and one of the things that was repeated to me all the time was, whatever you do, don't memorize. That's the worst thing you can do in math class. And everything's like science and math, for engineering students. I was doing mechanical engineering. So like everything's, science and math, and it's like math, and whatever you do not memorize things. And a lot of people struggle with that. But what people tell me, I never took one biology class in college. But what people who are in like some biology related thing, like maybe they're a biologist, like a scientist, or maybe they work in medicine, or something like that, they tell me that that's like all just a super amount of memorization. And from what I find is that the philosophical arguments for God's existence involve way more just comprehending and understanding the concept, and the historical evidence side is way more about memorization. So that's why our review seems like it's in order. The like a way to understand this is, most semesters in a math class, you really only have to learn 2 things, and they just ask you the same question about the same concept over and over again, like 100 different ways. And I remember one friend I had in high school, he had apparently gotten through high school and made A's in math by just memorizing. So he what they do is they ask you the same question a jillion different ways, and he would just memorize, when they ask you the question this way, just do this and this and this. When they ask you the question this way, just do this, this, and this. But in college, it really is a jillion different ways, and if you don't take the time to understand the concept, you're going to be in trouble. So to illustrate this, if I was to ask you how is a car assembled, you might say something like front bumper, the pulleys and flywheels, the engine, the firewall, the dash, the seat, the front seat, the back seat, the trunk and the rear bumper. Okay? Well, that's front to back, but what if I ask you to go back to front? Well, the order reverses. And so, or what if I ask you to go diagonally, or from side to side, or in a circle, if you're just memorizing what to say in each of those situations, then you're going to be memorizing quite a bit. But if you just comprehend what a car is and what all the components do, you can look at it from any angle and it's the same car. And if you just know the concept, then like you got it. And so math is a lot like that. And then when it comes to philosophical arguments for God's existence, the difficult part a lot of times is comprehending some concept or difficult to understand idea. And you have to kind of give it a chance, and you have to kind of think really hard about it. And then once you get it, it's like, oh, and there's sort of these epiphanies that you have along the way. It's like, oh, I get it now, And a lot of what I do on my end is like, I do have to memorize different illustrations, different questions, different objections, but they're all kind of dealing with the same concept. Historical evidence is different. You have like this grand case that you've got to build for this one event, the resurrection, and how it confirms Christianity, but it's like, ooh, if I don't deal with hoax theory that the disciples stole the body, then I can't, and I try to deal with hallucination theory. Well, then I also, what evidence do I have, regarding hallucination? And like, you have all these pieces of evidence that work together, and if like one of them's missing, then your opponent or the person who is objecting to you, trying to refute what you're saying, they can just milk that hole, and you're done. Like, your whole argument falls apart because it's got that one hole in it. And so it works kind of like a dam with a hole in it, and once there's that hole in the dam, it'll just wash the whole thing away. Like if you ever seen those videos of a road washing away, once that water gets going, it's just gone. So like that's why we're doing a review, and we're going to do a review through the format or the framework of like counter examples, where people say, oh yeah, what about this? All right, so let's just go write down our list. First list I saw online, this atheist YouTuber, he said this. He said, oh, Christian apologists used to say that the apostles died for their faith, but now they just say they're willing to die for their faith. And he says, but murderers are willing to die for what they're doing. It doesn't make murder good, and like, that was a big point. He forcefully and emphatically, was sort of a pulpit pounding point for him. And it's like, okay, I don't think he understands what willing to die means. Like, murderers are not willing to die. They're willing to risk death because they want to kill somebody. And of course it's risky to kill people because people tend to not take it very well when you try to kill them. You can make yourself bitter enemies when you try to kill people. If you fail or succeed, they may not like it too much. They may not take too kindly to that. So, and then other people who may not take kindly to it too. But in addition to that, I think, all we're trying to demonstrate with the apostles being willing to die for is that they really believe what they said they believed. That they were sincere. It doesn't make Christianity true in and of itself by itself. It's just that they were willing, So there's that. And then in addition to that, like, don't murderers believe in what they're doing? Like, I think they do. Like, there's no way around it. Like, if you murder someone, then you believe in murdering someone. What, did you murder them by accident? I remember one story of this girl. It was these two teenage girls who were fighting over this boy. It was one of those true crime things from Florida. And the fights got more and more aggressive. And they would punch. And this girl stabbed this other girl in the heart. But it was just like they were just going at it in the fury of the moment. And she just had the knife and swung at her. And it went right in her heart. And she ended up murdering this other girl. And she says she didn't try to kill her. Well, it wouldn't be premeditated, but it was a heat of the moment murder. You didn't stab somebody, So like, she believed in what she was doing, at least to some degree. Anyway, so in addition to that, the apostles aren't going out murdering people. They're not going out risking their lives to rob stores. They're like, the risk comes from their preaching, the message that they're preaching. So it's a very different situation. Okay, it's more about their religion. Okay, and we'll get into the evidence because I think it's important. We're going to take a look at the comparison with Mormons because I just find it interesting to compare. The Mormons make these comparisons, and then we'll take a look at some other things. But one example is the 9/11 hijackers, who counterexample. They obviously believed in what they were doing. They committed suicide to destroy the World Trade Center, and they died. They crashed jumbo passenger jets into the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, and that proves they were sincere. And the fact that the apostles were willing to die for what they believed, and they were clear about why they were willing to die, but it's like the issue is the apostles were sincere. If they were really willing to die, I think those 9/11 hijackers were sincere believers in Islam, right? And more than that, their particular whatever belief structure they had, I guess you could call them a sect within Islam that led them to that, because most Muslims don't do things like that. So they had a specific, they were more than just Muslim, they were they had a specific belief that they clearly believed, is my point. Like they believed it. So anyway, moving on, the how do I put it? One of the questions is okay, well, what did the apostles believe? Okay, what did they claim they were willing to die for? Okay, well, again, using the books of Paul that are undisputed, if you just read 2 Corinthians beginning to end, he makes it quite clear, as clear as you could want, that it's because Jesus Christ was killed and raised from the dead, and that's why they believe they will also be united with him, and they don't fear death. That is the repeated theme. It's also repeated for us by Polycarp. Okay, so Polycarp is this guy that says, the apostles, in his letter to the Philippians, he says that the apostles, were willing to die for that. Okay, so all right, where does Polycarp get at? Well, we can prove historically that Polycarp knew John, because again we have Irenaeus writing to his friend Florinius. Florinius, I'm not good with these Roman names. Florinius is this friend of his who apparently was a student of Polycarp and has gone into, I think he became a Valentinian, which is a form of Gnosticism, which is we'll talk about Gnosticism later in this video, because it's relevant to one of these counterexamples. But basically it's a pseudo-Christian group that Irenaeus, writes this long thing against heresies, and he spends a lot of the time talking about how he disagrees with Gnosticism. Basically they believe that they had special abilities that gave them ability to read the New Testament and interpret it correctly, where it's way different because they can see the true meaning. We'll get into that. I don't know if we need to get into all that, but Polycarp, Irenaeus writes to Florinius, and he writes to Florinius about their old times when Polycarp taught them, and he writes to them about how Polycarp told them about how he became a Christian and his being a disciple of John. Okay, so this becomes, important. How do I put it? Florinius was in a position to know whether or not he and Irenaeus were students of Polycarp, and whether or not Polycarp said that. So that's a key for us, that Polycarp really was a disciple of John. But in addition to that, Polycarp was martyred for his faith, and he describes the same idea that it's in his epistle to Polycarp's epistle to the Philippians. He writes about this, that the apostles were, the reason is because they were imitating Christ, and Christ endured the cross, and Christian endurance becomes this idea of enduring suffering for Christ. Because God raised Jesus from the dead, He's going to raise us from the dead. Okay, so there you go. The Polycarp also himself was martyred, and so again, do we know that everything Polycarp said is true? Well, it's this stuff about why he's willing to be martyred that is relevant for the fact that he was martyred, which means he really believed it. Okay, so given that he was, executed for his faith, I think I said in a previous video that he was executed in Rome. It turns out he was executed probably in Smyrna. We have this story called the Martyrdom of Polycarp, which is written by his church in Smyrna to, it's another church that I forgot the name of. It's like a funny sounding Greek name. I can't remember the name of it, but we're fairly certain that this story was altered by Christians over the years to make it more dramatic. But as far as I know, the martyrdom of Polycarp is not contested, and so I'll just punt to the historians in general on that. And sometimes it's okay in historical argument to do that, because there's a lot of evidence you have to bring together, and if you can prove a bunch of points, people start to say, hey, it seems at least likely that you can prove another one. So there you have it. They were, the issue between them and the 9/11 hijackers is, for the apostles, it's that they witnessed Christ back from the dead, and whereas the 9/11 hijackers have just been raised to believe this all their lives, as far as Islam goes, and then you get added to that they join some sort of group that preached a particular interpretation of Islam that they bought into. And so there's no, ultimately they weren't in a position to know whether or not Muhammad really received messages from angels. Only Muhammad knew that. And then, whereas the apostles, it's did I see Jesus back from the dead? Yay or nay? So the 9/11 hijackers don't really know whether or not what they believe is true or not.